Imagine spending months or even years believing that your loved one's will clearly explains what should happen after they pass away. And then suddenly you find out that the will may not actually be valid. What happens next? Should everything revert back to an earlier will? Does the family split everything up? Does the court decide who receives the estate? These are questions many families face after a will is challenged. Finding out that a will is invalid does not always mean the estate simply disappears or that everything becomes a free-for-all. There are rules to determine what happens next. The law provides a framework for what happens to someone's property after they pass away. These rules can be misunderstood, however, since they depend on one very important question. Why was the will found invalid? That distinction can completely change what happens next. So before we talk about what happens after a will is found invalid, it helps to understand what that actually means. A will can be challenged for a few different reasons. Sometimes there are questions about whether the person who created the will understood what they were signing. Sometimes there are concerns that someone pressured them or influenced their decisions, or maybe there are issues with whether the will was properly created or signed according to legal requirements. But a will is not considered invalid simply because someone disagrees with it. A family member being unhappy with an inheritance decision does not automatically mean that the will is legally defective. Courts look for specific legal problems before declaring a will invalid. When a court determines that a will is invalid, the next steps depend on what other legal documents or what other circumstances exist. A common mistake people make when determining if a will is valid is assuming that invalid means the person's property automatically goes to their closest family member. Sometimes that may happen, but it really depends on the circumstances and the laws of the state involved. Another mistake people can make is assuming that the court will simply create a new plan based on what seems fair. Courts generally do not rewrite someone's wishes. Instead, they follow legal rules for distributing the estate. People sometimes assume that if a will is invalid, the entire estate process starts over from the beginning, but that may not always be the case. Depending on the situation, there may be another valid will, or the estate may move forward under state inheritance laws. Another misconception that can cause a lot of confusion is that many people think that the person who challenged the will automatically receives something. But challenging a will and inheriting from an estate are two separate issues. Someone may have a valid reason to question a will without necessarily becoming the person who receives the assets. So, what actually happens when a will is found invalid? The answer comes down to what other options exist under the law. In general, one of two things usually happens. First, if there is an earlier valid will, the estate can be handled according to that earlier document. For example, if someone created a valid will years ago and then later created a newer will that's found invalid, the earlier will may become important. Second, if there's no other valid will, the estate can be distributed according to that state's intestacy laws. Intestacy simply means the legal process for distributing property when someone dies without a valid will. These laws generally determine who inherits based on family relationships, such as surviving spouse, children, parents, or other relatives. But every situation is different. The outcome depends on specific facts, including the documents that are involved, the reasons the will was invalid, and the laws of the state where the estate is handled. So that's why it's so important not to assume what will happen based on someone else's experience. A situation that seems similar can have very different legal outcome. An attorney who understands the specific circumstances and the laws of the state can help explain what options may exist. This video is just for educational purposes. It's not legal advice. But if you'd like to understand how the law may apply in your specific situation, mention this video to the attorneys at Woodbury and Ybarra and get a free consultation. The link's in the video description, phone number as well. Our attorneys are experienced, specialize in this specific type of issue, and can get you the information you need to know what your next steps are.